In this segment, in our discussion of the 5 components of leadership, we're going to talk about the role of the leader, which is the first component. Leaders obviously play a key role in the process of leadership. The role is more complex than detailing the attributes of just traits, as with earlier conceptions of leadership. This complex view of leadership goes beyond the leader as the person in charge. It really focuses on the relationship between leaders and followers based on the expectations that range from whatever the leader decides goes, this command and control or directive approach, which you see outlined on the right, to leaders that are more facilitative, where organizations allow followers to be more engaged and empowered to make decisions, where the leader is a facilitator. And these extremes form the basis of what we'll call the leadership continuum, which is a full range of leader-follower relationships, from the directive style, where the leader drives the relationships and defines the goals, to the facilitative style, which is more group-focused, more we-focused, where followers hold power over the leader, and the leader plays a role of more of a facilitator, helping the group achieve common goals. Followers work with the leader toward those common objectives. So as we begin to discuss this notion of leadership from the standpoint of the leadership continuum, leadership is marked by constant power negotiations between leaders and followers. Rost, one of the 20th century leadership theorists, argues that the 20th century industrial age was an age that focused more on command and control. As followers became more and more educated with more information, we begin to see leadership become more group-focused, more we-oriented side of the continuum. And that is really where we are in the 21st century. Both sides are needed based on situations and environmental contexts. Many have been directive when the environment calls for group-oriented leadership, and others have failed to take charge. They've continued to focus on deliberation among a group of people. So it's important as leaders that we all identify our comfort zone within this continuum of the directive to the facilitative. This is partly guided by individual personality traits that we each have that shape where we are placed, where our comfort level is within the authoritarian side of this continuum versus the comfort that we might have leading from behind. And it's important to adopt and learn from both. And that's one of the reasons as you look at personality in leadership and you look at your individual leadership, be it the Myers-Briggs personality indicator or the Enneagram, and trying to identify and widen the level of comfort that you have to be effective in a wider variety of circumstances. Directives need to facilitate, and group-oriented we leaders need to direct. And so developing the self-awareness where you begin to turn challenges to a level of comfort. So any discussion of leadership needs to focus a little bit on power and discuss power. A complete view of leadership needs to really understand, and scholars have paid close attention to the concept of power and authority when studying the role of the leader in the leadership process. Raven and French are two of the most famous theorists who talked about this basis of power, the work that they did in the 1950s. They identified a taxonomy of power, which was defined in terms of influence, change in behavior, opinions, and attitudes of people based on influence of the leader. And so their 5 bases of power include the following taxonomy: the idea of reward, the idea of coercive, where you use punishment as a way to coerce people, where the third is the expert, someone who has knowledge and information, uses intelligence. The fourth is legitimate, and that's the decision-making authority. So positional power, the power authority rests with that person. And the third one is referent power, and that's power based on relationships between leaders and followers. So power is not simply in the purview of leaders. Followers also can wield power. Heifetz, another one of the leadership theorists that we'll talk about in this course, talks about leading with authority or without authority. And this is based on your position. So the latter, leading without authority, entails complex influence relationships. But power does not have to be exclusively accorded to either party, leader or follower, and it never should be necessarily accorded to either or. The relationship between leaders and followers should be one of power with rather than power over. James McGregor Burns, again, another theorist that we're going to talk a good bit about in the course, talks about power relationships that are grossly unbalanced. And his argument is that such an arrangement is hardly leadership. He doesn't call unbalanced power, too much power, leadership. He refers to it as power wielding. So this gross imbalance of power is power wielding rather than leadership. Such a use of power takes away the individual choice, the freedom to choose to follow a person. That's no longer a leader. You think about the four individuals in the picture below on the slide. The two individuals on the left, Gandhi and Martin Luther King, didn't necessarily have positional authority. They had influence, but they had leadership, according to Heifetz's theory. The two individuals on the right side, Hitler and Stalin, would have been what Heifetz referred to as power wielders. And so in his estimation, there's no such thing as a good leader and a bad leader. There is simply a good leader and a power wielder. Hitler and Stalin would have been power wielders. So all leaders are actual or potential power holders, but not all power holders are leaders. So let's move to the power or to the leadership continuum. And as we've discussed, the leadership continuum is simply that, a continuum based on the far left side, the focus on the individual, the focus on the leader, the I, to the right side of the continuum, the focus on the group, the we, the collective. And there's a wide array of placements on this continuum that are evident in the study and practice of leadership, and many of the theories that we're going to be discussing throughout the course fall somewhere along this continuum based on the primacy of the leader versus the primacy of the group. And so it is all of these are really based on the power levels of the leader along this continuum. So starting with trait theory, some of the oldest theories that we talked about is the idea that certain individuals have superior ability and naturally inclined toward leadership. These people believe that leaders are born, not made. W.E.B. Du Bois, in the reading The Talented Tenth that we did, talks about this clear division of leaders and followers, and that leaders rise to the top and have special ability. Power grows around these people, these individuals, these institutions, and they form a privileged few. This is really the institutionalization of leadership and keeping leadership among just a minority. By the early to middle 20th century, behaviorist approaches, Ralph Stogel, who began the first academic study of leadership in Ohio State University, talks about this not so much universal set of traits based on people's born or even bred understanding of leadership, but this notion of behavior. Leadership is not about who you are, but what you do. So the behaviorists conceive leadership in terms of interactions of variables in constant change or flux. They focus on two factors, the relationship behavior and task behavior. And so you move right on the continuum, ceding power to followers. Stogel moved the focus of leadership to the relationship that exists between persons in social situations. It's still very leader-centric through the 1960s, but by the middle of the 20th century, you begin to see follower-leader relationships begin to play more and more important role. And so the two patterns of leader behavior emerged in the mid to late 20th century, and that's leader focused on task versus leader focused on people. The former is a goal-oriented style, and the whole path goal theory that focuses on the relationship between leaders and followers around goals and tasks. Theories like Blake and Moulton and the leadership grid, Hersey and Blanchard, situational leadership, Fielder's contingency theory, all address the whole tension of the focus on this trade-off between leaders, whether it's better off to focus on building relationships and have the concern for people and make goals secondary, or other times when leaders need to guide the follower through a task and the relationship, focusing on that task or that goal becomes more focused. And so effective leaders need to decide the proper combination based on situations and environmental context as to whether to follow the goal or task-oriented approach or whether to use the more people-centered approach. As we look at transformational leadership, we move more toward that primacy of the group. And of course, this is the idea of the relationship between leaders and followers, going from a transactional relationship where it's an exchange or a bargain between leaders and followers, a power relationship based on an incentive like pay, to something that Burns talked about, purpose, holding the leader and follower together in not superficial ways like transactional approaches, but transformational process of leadership advocates higher levels of motivation and morality, human and ethical conduct of both the leader and in leadership, helps both the leader and the follower reach their full potential and go beyond their self-interest, moving more toward the we part of that continuum, again, focusing on the purpose. And then the last approach that's on this continuum is a servant leader approach, and this is based on the work of Robert Greenleaf. And this is a radical conception of leadership that rejects the notion that the leader should be the center of the leadership process. And it's challenging because many leaders don't want to shed the positional power that give them legitimacy. But really in servant leadership, you have to look at the leader as servant, and you have to look at ways that you can put the primacy of the group beyond the primacy of you as the individual. So as we discuss the evolution of leadership, we'll look more at this